Hello, and welcome to How Music Expresses. I'm Alexey Nikolsky, composer and musicologist with a doctorate degree from the Moscow Tchaikovsky Conservatory. In my previous video, I explained what a musical scale is and how it is helpful for composers and performers in making and performing music. In this video, I'm going to explore this subject deeper and show how different scales can be combined in a multi-part music, where the expression of each scale contributes to the entirety of music expression. Even in the simplest homophonic texture, the melody and the accompaniment might each engage different scales as a result of combining different types of intervallic typology. Let me explain what I mean. Pitch classes within a set have a particular functional relationship with one another, and as such generate a set of interval classes. Every pair of pitch classes obtains a corresponding interval class. For example, in C major, its first and second degrees form an interval of a major second, whereas its first and third degrees make up a major third. This way, an entire set of 7 degrees, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, forms 55 interval classes. 7 unisons and octaves, 5 major seconds and minor sevenths, 2 minor seconds and major sevenths, 3 major thirds and minor 6, 4 minor thirds and major 6, 6 fourths and fifths, and 1 triton. These interval classes are autonomous from pitch classes, because different pitch classes in the same set can form the same interval class. Thus, in the set of C major, 5 pairs of pitch classes, CD, DE, FG, GA, and AB, all share the same interval class of a major second. Our capacity to detect and compare pitch classes greatly exceeds our capacity to handle interval classes. Most people have no problem hearing the difference between two scales when they differ by just a single pitch class, but not by a single interval class. For instance, this choir from the opera by Rimsky-Korsakov sounds as though it is in heptatonic A major, because it uses the pitch classes G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp. But you probably can spot that the music doesn't sound as a normal major key. Its character is much more meditative and uncertain. In the opera, it corresponds to the scene where citizens of Kitish pray for a miracle to save them from the upcoming Mongol invasion. What makes the major sound strange here is the prevalence of gradual stepwise melodic motion combined with consistency of G natural in the upper register, which contradicts the G sharp in the lower register. They form a so-called false relation. It occurs between two tones that are an augmented or a diminished octave apart. It is as though a pitch class becomes split, like in this case between G and G sharp. G sharp, in this example, is not a chromatic alteration. Alterations are accidental by their nature. The note altered in one place goes back to its original state at some later point, often in the same bar. But in this excerpt, the low G sharp stays the same all the way through. That is why the music doesn't sound as the regular major key. Musicologists call it обиходный mode. It is quite common in Russian ecclesiastical and folk music. Similar modes are typical for the Orthodox plain chant from Greece to Georgia. Such modes sound more tense than the regular major keys due to the dissonance of split G, G sharp, like in this case. But this tension is moderated by placing G and G sharp into different registers and never using them at the same time. As a result, the music as though noticeably strains when ascending and relaxes when descending, much more so than in regular major or minor keys. Well, what you observed in this example is exactly a situation where the обиходный mode shares its pitch classes with A and D major, but contains one different interval class, the augmented octave. And this is not easy to hear. Identifying the обиходный mode by ear requires extensive ear training, and it is still much harder than hearing the difference between music composed in C major versus music in melodic C minor, both of which differ by a single pitch class, E. In my previous video on scales, I demonstrated the difference between the descending heptatonic and octatonic scales. Let me remind you how they sound. Octatonic scales feature one extra pitch class that makes the scale symmetrical and smooth. They contain a whopping 72 interval classes, 8 unisons and octaves, 4 major seconds and minor sevenths, 4 minor seconds and major sevenths, 8 minor thirds and major sixths, 4 major thirds and minor sixths, 4 perfect fourths and fifths, and 8 tritons. This is the prime reason why octatonic music sounds so mysterious and intricate. It contains 17 more interval classes than heptatonic music. However, octatonic and heptatonic typologies are incompatible in the same music texture. It is simply impossible to place an octatonic melody on a heptatonic accompaniment so that all the heptatonic pitch classes would be retained in an octatonic pitch set. That is why you are highly unlikely to mistake heptatonic music for octatonic. In contrast, the combination of a heptatonic accompaniment and a pentatonic melody is quite easy and common. Pentatonic notes are enclosed in heptatonic scales. Therefore, pentatonic and heptatonic parts can be easily combined within the same music texture. But such a combination makes the expression of each scale interact. Here I have to stress that each type of a scale carries its own expression. Let's have a look. Heptatonic scales are generated by dividing an octave into 7 steps of varying size that form a very smooth transition from tone to tone. 2 of the steps are smaller than the rest, and as a result stand out by being tighter, and therefore facilitating the melodic motion to the closest pitch. The placement of the semitones determines the character of the scale. Smaller steps generate stronger resolutions at the ends of melodic phrases. Heptatonic major sounds lighter and sharper than heptatonic minor, because in major the tighter steps are placed at the top of the tetrachords, whereas in minor they are lower and as though pull the weight down, making the scale sound more depressed. Octatonic scales also divide the octave in semitones and whole tones, but in a perfect symmetrical way, grouped in 4 binary couples. Because each couple is identical in its intervallic structure, the entire scale sounds too homogeneous for the tonic to stand out. Melodic motion keeps gliding through the scale without generating a relaxed halt. This makes octatonic melodies appear alert, somewhat intricate, bizarre, and perhaps ambivalent, due to the presence of 4 semitones, twice more than in heptatonic scales. The whole tone scale is also symmetrical and incapable of marking the tonic, but it completely lacks any semitones altogether. For this reason, whole tone music sounds mystifying and otherworldly, but not foreboding, anxious, brooding, or scary, as octatonic music often does. The chromatic scale opposes the whole tone scale by completely lacking whole tones. It breaks the octave into 12 identical semitones, but can configure them into groups that characterize major and minor keys. Subsequently, it can display tonic, but keeps it obscured due to too many chromatic shades. As a result, chromatic melodies carry greater tension than octatonic melodies. Chromaticism is commonly used to express suffering, despair, and struggle, like all negative emotions. In this famous habanera, Bizet shows the taunting and headstrong nature of a gypsy girl who enjoys tormenting her suitors. A long succession of tense semitones in a descending chromatic scale, shaped in a minor key, contributes to this expression. As you can already see, some scales can be combined together, whereas some others cannot. Chromatic scales can be easily combined with heptatonic scales, and their combination generates a new expression. Let's compare Bizet's habanera that we just heard with Tchaikovsky's Pas de deux, from his Nutcracker, which uses the descending minor scale. Tchaikovsky's example sounds as discontented as Bizet's, but it is much more relaxed, weak, and droopy. And if we compare the habanero tune with the melody of a song that implements all 12 chromatic semitones in an atonal context, we'll see that a pure chromatic arrangement sounds so tense that it suits mainly the expression of anguish or conflict. In this atonal lieder by Schoenberg, the lyrics say, "Now that my lips are motionless and burning, I first notice where my feet have taken me." Clearly negative connotation. The absence of tonal context makes all semitones about equally important, so they fight for our attention, producing the conflicting impression. Now we see that the habanera combines the conflicting nature of 12-tone music with the unhappy expression of the descending minor heptatonic scale. On the other hand, octatonic scales are incompatible with heptatonic and whole tone scales, but they can be combined with the chromatic scale. Unlike octatonic, whole tone scales can be fit into the minor key. In this case, they combine the expression of the pure whole tone music, remember my example of Debussy, with the expression of the minor scale. This music by Rimsky-Korsakov sounds much more tense than Debussy's, because of the dissonance created by the clash of the semitones. At the same time, it sounds more mysterious than the Tchaikovsky example, because of so many tritones and the absence of clear harmonic cadences. The entire character here sounds powerful, strange, and somewhat angry. But by far the most common combination of scales of different typology is the combination of pentatonic melody and heptatonic accompaniment. On keyboard instruments, pentatonic and heptatonic scales are most obvious. White keys form heptatony, whereas black keys pentatony. They break the octave in 5 interval classes, hence the term pentatonic, from Greek penta, meaning 5. The difference between pentatonic and heptatonic scales becomes quite obvious if to play them on the piano very fast.